I know you put a video up. It was on. I forgot what the title was, but there was a mention of salt on there, and it went viral. But you removed it because people were kind of like saying you actually do need salt, but you actually meant excessive salt, like table salt, putting excess salt in your food, because you can't really avoid salt. It's everywhere, even if it's 0.01% in vegetables when you cook it, boil it, basically.
Right. I mean, if you think about it evolutionarily, and yes, so I'll refer to that video. So that video, I spoke about ways to lower your blood pressure. I think that was the context of the video. And one of the things that I discussed, which is probably one of the most important topics, at least in the United States, is the overconsumption of salt in the form of sodium. So there's many types of salts, right? Including potassium, but sodium is heavily consumed in this country, far more than many others. And, it's no wonder that we have such a large prevalence of high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease here in the United States. And so one of the topics that I brought up was the overconsumption of salt. And I said, we really need to reduce and cut down on salt in our diets. And I said, it's not essential. And I think that, it went viral, and there was a lot of comments saying, okay, this guy's saying that it's sodium or salt is not essential, but we all have a concentration of sodium in our bodies, which is obviously true, and that we need it for everyday functions, which is obviously true. And I don't think I was trying to say that we need zero sodium in our life. I was trying to say that we get it from, eating a balanced, healthy diet. And so eating a lot of processed foods, which is probably the biggest culprit of excess of sodium, and putting a ton of salt in our foods when we cook or go to a restaurant, is adding, 3, 4, sometimes almost tenfold the amount of the recommended dose from all the consensus and guidelines. And so that was the message I was trying to make there about salt itself. And I think that's what's difficult about social media. If we're on the topic, is that you say something and it just really gets taken out of context. So yes, we do take way too much salt in this country. I think the current, AHA, FDA, WHO criteria states anywhere between 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams for a healthy adult of sodium-based salt. And, that's not based on super hard data. We don't really have an RDA, a recommended dietary allowance for salt, for sodium, but based on the data that we have of chronic disease correlation, we know that eating in excess of, let's say, 2,300 to 3,000 milligrams of sodium a day, which is about a teaspoon of salt, is where you start to see a strong correlation to high blood pressure and downstream heart disease. And so that's where I kind of came up with the idea that it's not essential to add salt to your diet. Not saying that sodium is not essential for our life, because I don't think we would be alive, because, in order to make ATP, which is the basic unit of energy in our life, in all of our cells in our living bodies, it comes from the sodium potassium transport pump, which helps to create ATP in our mitochondria. So yes, we do need sodium, but we don't need as much as we think we do. And we could probably do with less in our day-to-day lifestyle habits.
Yeah. And I can see that. I mean, is that one of your areas of interest, cardiovascular disease?
Yes, because, yes, and I can explain that. So number one, it's because I'm an emergency medicine physician, and one of the main things that I treat as bread and butter emergency medicine is chest pain. And chest pain, we always have to concern ourselves with a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. And so the number one, killer of people in this country and probably globally is heart disease. And so, one of the biggest risk factors for developing downstream atherosclerosis and heart disease and having a heart attack in the future is high blood pressure. And one of the main drivers for high blood pressure is excess sodium in our diet. So, it's an important health issue for me, not only because I see so many patients with high blood pressure. It's almost the norm. It's kind of rare to have patients with perfect blood pressure nowadays, but also because, it affects my family. High blood pressure runs in my family, in my genetics, essential hypertension. And, it's something that I take seriously, because I also, try to combat my own, blood pressure elevations and keeping my blood pressure under control. And so I really do a lot that I personally can do to keep my levels in check. So one of the most important things that I've done is really reduced the intake of sodium. And the first place I had to look was the nutrition label of everything that's in the freezer, everything that's in the fridge or cabinet that was processed. And, we are on a mission to make the majority of the foods that we eat here as a family, whole food, majority plant-based diet. My wife and child, still eat, meat like chicken, rarely beef, mostly just chicken. I, for years, was eating only plant-based foods, and then have recently, in the last year and a half or so, reincorporated fish because of its health benefits, and also because it confers a good variety to the meals that I consume now. But I just try to make an effort that the things that are prepared, the things that we eat, are mostly prepared at home. And when you prepare them yourself and they're whole food ingredients, you have the control over how much sodium goes into what you eat, and you can really take note of, even, simple things just have so much sodium content. And I think Americans are guilty of eating in excess of, I would say, 7, 8, 10 grams of salt a day, which is extraordinary. So, high blood pressure and salt especially are things that are near and dear to me.
Yeah, I can actually reason with that, obviously, because I'm a podiatrist and I work in the diabetic foot clinic. So for me, that's like cardiovascular disease is the number one associated disease with diabetes. So I've got to work with some of the best vascular surgeons, and kind of I always try to keep up to date with the literature, new changes in that. And I had a colleague, a senior colleague of mine, who basically had a mini stroke. He was probably 56, late 50s. And he was shocked because he had a healthy lifestyle. He used to cycle, like for the last 25, 30 years, he used to cycle on evenings, weekends. But he had it in the family. His dad he actually suffered from cardiovascular disease. He had a heart bypass. And then, so he they found out it was hereditary. So, and again, he looked kind of healthy, a white, he's a Caucasian 56-year-old. So he was kind of shocked himself, because it's usually cardiovascular disease associated with certain ethnic backgrounds, Asian, Black, but yeah, you just never know. It can affect anyone. So I can kind of reason with you there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think other than carbon monoxide, which is the famous silent killer, high blood pressure is the other famous silent killer, because people don't realize that it's not all nurture. It's also nature when it comes to high blood pressure. I mean, you can live a relatively very healthy lifestyle. You might be active, go biking or exercise, and you don't smoke ever, minimize alcohol, and you still might have high blood pressure. And that mainly could be driven by your genetics. And so it's really important, not only to have your yearly annual checkup and know what your blood pressures are, especially as you become more middle-aged and more senior as an adult, but it's also important to take a very close look at how you're eating every single day. And, even me personally, who for years, I am in the pursuit of optimum nutrition and health, I had to take a look at my pantry and my refrigerator and realize that there were so many things that I was still doing wrong. And, you live and you learn, and you learn more things every single day. And I think there's always a way to do a little bit better. And if, and that's actually exciting, because, if you figure something out and, nothing changes for the rest of your life, I think that could be a very boring and dull life where you're not continuously learning. And so I learn something every day and try to improve myself every day. And that gives me something to look forward to, because I want my next year to be healthier than my current year, and so on and so forth.